Thanks for that introduction. So my name's Kath, and just to sort of give you a tiny sort of insight to my background to understand how I end up sitting here talking about what we're going to talk about today. So I did 22 years in the British military, and the last 12 years of that was with the UK Special Forces. So I worked in a very male-dominant environment. So did I come across verbal harassment, physical harassment, sexual harassment? Yes, I did. It was part of that environment, I guess. And did I complain to anybody? Did I alert anybody? No, I didn't, because I was quite good at my job, really enjoyed my job the majority of the time, and I wanted a career. So I was very afraid that if I alerted people, it would see me as a troublemaker. And basically, I would have got told, if you can't hack it as a female, then leave. So I didn't say anything until 2006. And we had a yearly briefing. And this particular year, we got told we had an equal opportunities officer coming along. And I thought, thank goodness for that. We've now got somebody who understands that we can turn to. This was a major turning point in my eyes for the military. However, it was a young guy who was coming to address a big room full of Special Forces men and me. So looking back, I guess I can kind of understand why he did what he did. But I think he was probably intimidated by the audience. And he was going to talk to these big macho alpha males about diversity, equality, harassment. And so I guess as an icebreaker, the first slide he put up was of a naked woman. And I'm not going to describe the picture, but it was porn. And the room erupted in laughter, and I got up and walked out. And that was the day that I left the military. I still had to serve 18 months. And so in that 18 months, I tried to educate and speak to people, my bosses, people around me, about actually what it was like to be a female working with them all. Not like it was going to make any difference to me now, but I was trying to set a precedent or educate them for the females that were coming behind me. And I've been very lucky in the last 12 years to work with a lot of communities, individuals, corporate people, to work out how you can make your environment that you work in and live in to be more safer and inclusive, particularly for vulnerable people, females, how we can empower each other, how we can reach out and make certain networks, especially when we work in isolated environments. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, or I say I'm going to talk about. I'm going to really try and use it as a facilitated discussion, because what we want to really sort of take away from today is to raise awareness of our environments and the situations around ourselves, because we all perceive things differently. And a lot of the time when we do speak out about certain harassments or how we feel unsafe about working in certain places, people don't understand because they've never seen it, because they didn't realise, because we all kind of walk around with blinkers on a lot of times. And some people don't want to look at harassment in the workplace, for instance, because if they see it, then they've got to do something about it. And not everybody knows how to deal with that. We need to raise awareness, we need to educate, and we need to communicate. So hopefully that's what we're going to do over the next 40 minutes or so. So if we can put the next slide on, please, Rosie. Hopefully, we can get this communication going now by using the chat box, because we just want to sort of, just one word or a couple of words in the chat box, highlight the different threats that you've either faced within the workplace or in your environments, or threats that you perceive are there. What actually worries you? Because, like I said, we all perceive things differently. And when I was in Nigeria last month, I did 8 days with 12 different ladies each day. And I asked them the same thing: write down the different threats that you perceive or face in your home environment, in your work environment, and in your social environment. And over the 8 days, about 90 people more or less gave the same threats. On the very last day, I had 12 men, and I asked them exactly the same question. And their threats that they perceived and saw in those 3 different environments were totally different. So it's not just a gender, how we see something. It's also age. It's also our life experiences as well. You know, from the environment that I used to work in the military, I did lots of different courses and things. So I can go into insecure environments and feel quite safe because I know what to identify and how I can get myself out of problems. Whereas other people, you know, wouldn't go there because we don't know how to deal with it. So yeah, if you can just write a few words in the chat, and if we share some of the threats that we perceive around our workspace or environment, then we can discuss what we can do about that and what things we can put in place to hopefully make it safer and more inclusive for everybody. Okay, I can see Georgina there, thank you. Generally traveling alone. Yeah, let me just bring my chat box up a little bit more so I can see. Particularly feeling vulnerable when sat next to a male who took pictures of me and would not leave me alone. That's a great one to start off with. And this happened actually to the lady that went out to Nigeria with me. We were sat having lunch with a driver, a guy that had driven us around on our day off. And I didn't notice it initially because I was just people watching. But she said that the driver was actually taking pictures of her on his mobile phone. So I'll come back into that one when we go on to the next slide. What can we do about it? And how can we make it more safe for ourselves? Yeah, traveling alone again, and lack of language skills to respond certainly. Yeah, so I think it's something that, as a female, we all get nervous about traveling alone. Traveling alone, you know, do we take taxis? Do we take Ubers? If we do, where do we sit? Do we sit in the front? Do we sit in the back of that vehicle? Public transport, where do we sit? Especially if rowdy people get on. So we take the problem, which is you know, the traveling alone, and then we need to try and find some kind of protocols to put in place to make us less vulnerable or less at risk. And I'll cover that in a moment on the next slide. Do we have anything else? The language skills, yeah, cool. Harassment, verbal harassment in the group setting, stalking. Good, so the threats that we're talking about at the moment, really it comes down to a lot of conflict management. If people, you know, 45 minutes, I can't teach that right now, but we teach a lot of, when it comes to personal safety, we talk a lot about conflict management. It's our body language, it's the tone of voice that we use, and we're trying to de-escalate the problem, because at the end of the day, it's far better to, what I say, talk and walk and get away from the problem than it is to sort of shout back and escalate, and then, you know, the anger is going to turn into frustration and violence. So it's all about conflict management, de-escalation, disengagement skills is what we also teach. You know, if people grab hold of you, how to get away again without escalating, and then of course the self-defense at the end. So it's something that I would recommend to people, or get to your workplace, if they could do. We can do it in a day. You know, it certainly helps. Cultural expectations, that's one that I've fallen foul of in the past, because again, in the military, we have what they call banter. People, we make jokes out of things, but it's the way that we cope. And I made a joke once to a driver in Israel, of all places, and it backfired, because he took what I said to him literally, and he thought that I actually had liked him. And then he was trying to hassle me to come back to my room and everything. And it was all because I'd just made this stupid joke and didn't fully understand their cultural way. I guess cultural expectations as well, it's pre-planning. You know, if you're traveling to countries, then it's knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the more prepared you are, and then you won't make the silly mistakes that, you know, I've done in the past. If it's cultural expectations of people in the working environment, again, it's that knowledge, it's understanding people, because the more we can understand why they have to go pray at certain times, then we can respect we can respect those cultures and hopefully break down the barriers. Yes, yeah, so sorry, I'm just reading Andrea there. The work environments that normalise low-level harassment banter, it makes it more difficult to deal with, definitely. And that's what I did, you know, in the military or your surrounds, you kind of join in because that's what everybody expects. But then when you come to complain about something, they're like, well, you were always laughing and joking, Kath, you know, we thought you liked it. So again, it's that educating people. It's telling people that it's not acceptable to do certain things. Again, sometimes with cultural or when you're traveling, you're hiring drivers and things, it's having barriers. Make those barriers clear, boundaries, you know, make them clear and early on, because depending on your job or you're working with people abroad, you know, you need to get on with these people sometimes. Because you're relying on them, you know, you need a trustworthy driver, for instance, but you have to put those boundaries in place, because if you don't, then it's a very grey area and people misinterpret certain things that we say or do sometimes.
Kath, whilst you're just going through these, can I just make an interesting observation? If I was to ask people, you're preparing to travel overseas, what are the key threats, the things that will do you harm? We would have people very quickly start listing specific things that would cause you harm. So someone would say road traffic accident or crime, I appreciate that is bigger, or medical. But actually turn this question into something where we're looking specifically at VORG, and we don't seem to be drilling into that same area with a lot of these answers coming up. We have taken it up a level. So, you know, some of the answers we've had, you know, lack of context, analysis of location, that's absolutely right. And that's one of the key things that may be a driver to how we find ourselves in a situation. But in terms of what are the things which will do us harm within the context of VORG, at the moment, I just wonder, is it perhaps how I've phrased that question? So under the context of VORG and the definitions, what are the things which we would see as causing an individual harm, whether it be physical, mental? I mean, I put in there, you know, for example, if we're sticking true to it, then things like stalking, coercive behavior, domestic abuse, all of these things will fall under that bracket. So I wonder if there's any others that people can think of with regards to that.
Okay, let's do the next slide, Rosie. And so there's some of the threats that Darren's just been speaking about that we came up with. So is there any situations where you can think of any scenarios that you're put into certain situations for work that might increase the threat of these things happening to you? Okay, so sorry, I'm just reading Andrew's there. There's instances where funds have been withheld, threatened to be withheld if women don't comply, and it puts employers in incredibly tricky situations. Can you just expand on that slightly, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. I know of, unfortunately, far too many women who have worked for international organizations when they deploy overseas or are trying to work with donors, including individuals in the UN. It has been made clear that they would get funding if they provided certain sexual services, which is really incredible when you think about it. But, you know, I even know of a country director for a UN agency who made that clear to a female and seen texts where that was the case. And you would kind of think, oh, well, we're internationals, this would never happen. But actually, it very much does. Exactly.
It's much more common than what people understand. Can you think of how you can stop that from happening? You know, is it reported? are there security protocols put in place to try and stop it from happening?
I think what Geraldine says is really correct, but it's tricky if you don't feel like you have organizational backing behind you and you don't know where to go to complain, because it becomes a very personal matter between you and whomever that person is.
Yeah, that's correct. And unfortunately, if we can just put the next slide on, please, Rosie. A lot of, yeah, I thought it was going to say where next. Where do these things happen? And unfortunately, the highest proportion of these kind of threats that we face happen in the workplace, or it's, you know, it's your mentors, it's people that you work with, like your donors, and situations. It's unbelievable the percentage actually that the harassment and stalking and things happen in a workplace. And I think it's incredibly difficult for females and males as well. But females is what we're really talking about today, is to report it, because, you know, who do you report it to, and does it make your life more difficult? Does it stop your promotions? Does it stop you from traveling and doing the job that you want to do? And it's totally wrong. And I think the only way that we can really change that is by education. You know, we need to educate people higher up in companies a lot of the time. And it has come out, you know, over the last couple of years about the harassment and sexual harassment that a lot, or quite a few aid agencies do carry out. So things are beginning to change, but it's going to take a long time. So yeah, so working late in the office, hotel accommodation, it's incredibly difficult. But and again, you know, how do you choose your hotel? Who chooses the hotel for you? Is that all got to do with budgets? You know, because they might be choosing a hotel that doesn't cost a lot, but it's in an area where you're more likely to get assaulted and harassed. I remember one year I was put up in a hotel. Work had, you know, organised it, and when I got there, it was basically above a really, it was like a bar, and it was just all prostitutes in the bar. And, you know, it's unbelievable the amount of harassment I got because I had to leave this hotel at various times a day. You know, it wasn't like I could just stay in the hotel and not come out in the evening. What I did do is just stay there one night, and I went and found my own accommodation. So, yeah, again, it's all that pre-planning and knowledge of the areas, getting recommendations and things. Let me just read the next chat.
Just picking up on what Gerald just said there about the danger signals and then removing yourself from that situation. Certainly when I've been briefing travellers, and you'll know this, Kath, so better than I will in terms of the courses you've run, but having that individual have the confidence to draw that line and say, this is not acceptable, I'm going to stand up and walk out of that situation, is in itself quite a difficult position to be in. And especially if they don't necessarily have confidence in their organization to support that decision. You know, you would like to think that if you turn around and say, this is a red line, I'm walking out, when you phone back to headquarters, if it's not your office this has taken place in, that they're going to say, absolutely, we 100% support you walking out of that situation, and we're going to be there to support the situation as it goes through. I think that's always a concern. That goes back to what you were saying, Kath, in terms of having things laid out before we even reach that point of something going wrong, so people have the confidence in the situation and what they've got to support them.
Yeah, you know, if you think about working late in the office as well, you know, quite often people get asked to stay back. So again, you know, if you're in a management position, try and preempt things. Try and suggest people that, you know, that you're asking to stay behind to work late. You know, how are they getting home? How do they normally get home? If they drive themselves, where do they park the car? Is it in a well-lit area? You know, can you escort them to the car maybe, or get somebody to walk them to the car? Is it public transport? is that as reliable at night, you know. So we're trying to think things through and support the people, because sometimes people won't have that confidence to come and say to you, okay, I'm working late tonight, but you know, I don't feel safe walking to the bus stop by myself in the dark, for instance, you know. So we have to chat through things to people. Like I say, a lot of people, and a lot of men, even women, don't understand that the different dangers that women face. And so we have to tell them and educate them so that they can hopefully support us and change things, you know, change the protocols for work, change. Do you want to be alone at night in the office just with one of a man, for instance? You know, if he keeps harassing you, but people can't always help you unless we do raise awareness. And that's not, I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do. Maybe again, you know, if you've got managers, or you can go back and suggest to your boss or somebody at work and say, why don't we have a staff meeting where you ask people what their different threats and fears are at work, if they're having any harassment and things, and give people an opportunity to speak. Now, again, people might not want to speak openly in front of everybody else, but then they could, you know, at the end of the face-to-face, say, okay, there's a box going to be put in, one in the men's toilets, one in the ladies' cloakroom, and you could put your suggestions in there, you know, without your name on or anything. But having that face-to-face initially just shows the workforce that you do care, you know, and that you want to know, to be able to then help change things. And then obviously, like I say, you could have the suggestion box, if you like, so people can actually see what people are going through and try and understand everybody's fears, or the harassment that might be going on, and then do something about it. Does anybody have that kind of system in their workplace at the moment? No. I think, you know, it's sometimes it is everybody's responsibility to report any kind of harassment or violence that's going on. But again, you know, especially for the more inexperienced workers, or younger people, or people that haven't spent a lot of time in that company, find it difficult to go up to the higher management, if you like. So it's important that it's published out to everybody who the person is with the open door. You know, make sure that they're educated to know that they can go speak to these people. They are accessible. Just reading Geraldine there, a risk assessment. Yeah, a risk assessment is it's vitally important, because it's during your risk assessment that you're thinking about, it's your pre-planning. Yeah, you've thought about the different threats, and then you can put mitigation measures in place to hopefully lessen that threat happening to you. Risk assessments can be done by your own company, or you can do your own individually. And I always think it's better to try and do your own, because we all perceive that threat differently. So if I was to write a risk assessment for Darren, it might be totally different to what he would write for me. So it needs to be personalised as well. And it needs to be a different risk assessment to the different areas that you're going into, because, you know, we've got those different cultural aspects to take into consideration as well.
Can I just add to that? And it's slightly anecdotal, but in terms of other people's understanding, and this goes back to a travel safety briefing that I was asked to give for an Afghan national who was living in the US but was traveling back to Afghanistan. And the brief was a fairly standard briefing in terms of travel safety. But one of the areas that the the client management had asked us to really drill down into was travel in an armored B6 vehicle. So, what that looks like, what it feels like, etc., etc. And whilst briefing the individual on the B6 armored vehicle, I was politely stopped and said, actually, could we just go back to what you were talking about beforehand regards meeting protocols and safety and procedures and things I could put into place. She said, listen, I've been blown up in an armored B6. I get it. I'm more interested in the threats that I face when I'm in an office and meeting environment, and the things that you were talking about with regards to that. And that for me was a bit of an awakening, and potentially an awakening for the organization when I fed it back to them in terms of actually speaking with the individual, understanding what their concerns are before they travel, so that you can really tailor any type of briefings or training, threat assessment for those individuals before they go. So just one of those things that certainly strikes me as being fairly pertinent when it comes to that wider understanding of other people's needs.
Does anybody else want to share any other concerns that we can sort of chat about? I know we had the traveling alone, and that's difficult. I mean, there's different apps that you could have on your phone now. As security, you can share your location, obviously through WhatsApp, which is good. Again, I always try and plan ahead. It's not always possible to get back to the safety of your hotel or accommodation before dark. But it's looking at those routes that if you've got to walk or even drive, it's looking at those routes beforehand in daylight if you can. Have they got street lights there? Is it safe? Ask the local receptionist maybe, what happens in this part of town late at night? It might be fine during the day, but late at night it totally changes. Have a buddy system if you can. If you're working in these large sort of NGO organisations, who else is working there? There might be a different organisation, but you're staying sort of local to each other. Maybe you could have a buddy system, check up on each other, that you're both back in the hotel at whatever given time, like you say, you're going to be back. Have a check-in procedure with somebody, preferably in the same country that you are, but if not, somebody back home, have a check-in procedure. But also, if you're checking in with somebody, make sure that they know what to do if they don't receive that phone call or that text message that you said you're going to send. So you have to have a plan for them, because again, I've been the person that's been waiting for a phone call when my friend was in Africa and she didn't call me, and it's not a nice feeling to sit there thinking, okay, do I start doing this plan now, or do I wait for an hour because maybe the communications systems failed? So they need to have a plan as well. Traveling alone, Ubers are very safe in some countries. Other countries I wouldn't use them. I tend to take a photograph of the registration plate if I'm not using an Uber and send that through to somebody. Sometimes I do that overtly so the taxi driver can see me. Other times I do it covertly, depending on where I am. Sitting in vehicles, I tend to sit on the rear seat diagonally away from the driver so that I can see what he's doing and things. There was an instance where I was traveling in Gaziantep, just left the airport, and I didn't really do my planning before I went on that trip, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning when I arrived because of delays on the aircraft and everything. And I sat in the taxi diagonally as I always did. As we came down to the main road, there was a signpost that said Syria one way and Gaziantep the other. And he was on the phone talking a language I didn't understand, and it's the most uncomfortable and out of control feeling I've ever had. And I thought, what if he turns towards Syria? Because this is the time when all the kidnappings and the beheadings were going on. And I had it in my mind, if he started heading that way, then I was just going to go, move over to directly go behind him and strangle him or something, make the car crash, but get out of there. So you got to sort of, the stupid plan it might have been, but that's the only thing I could think of doing. Luckily, obviously, you went the right way. Sitting in the front seat of a vehicle, I personally don't like doing that because, again, you haven't got any physical barrier between you and the driver, so less control in some situations. Just having a good look at, yeah, so Joe was in the number plate and the check-in procedures. Yeah, yeah, check to make sure the technology works in the country that you're going in. Definitely. You can. I usually carry a little personal alarm as well, or maybe some not pepper spray because that's illegal in some countries. But there's a different type of spray. It's quite new on the market, and it sprays like a red paint. So things like that to help with self-defense. You know, if you're starting to get attacked, then they're usually quite good. The alarm, if anything, people are usually looking for an easy target, and if you obviously make this big loud noise, it might put people off. So that's good. What else are we talking about? Yeah, using Google Maps, and there's quite a lot of things now that you can use while it's offline as well, so you're not relying on the internet. Any other questions from anybody? Yeah, some alarms can make things worse. I mean, I prefer the spray if I'm going to carry anything. But again, it's all about avoiding these situations in the first place. You know, in Nigeria, we did the personal safety course for the day, a one-day course, and 80% of that course was all about the avoidance. It's all about your situation awareness. It's all about your observation skills. It's looking for the abnormal within a normal situation. So the earlier you can see something, hopefully we can avoid it. It's when we're, you know, walking along with our earphones in, listening to music. It's when we're texting on the phone, mobile phone, as we're walking along. You know, that's the times that things, if we're talking about muggings and things, that's when it's going to happen, because we're not seeing the build-up around ourselves. Yeah, so we're getting some good suggestions here for, you know, when we're sat in taxis and things. Again, if I'm traveling alone and I'm going to a country, especially if I haven't been to the country before, I will look at the airport and I will look to see where my hotel is, and I'll see the basic route. So straight away, if you're staying alert and you're observing once you're in the taxi, you can tell if you're generally going in the right direction or not. And if I feel that I'm not going in the right way, then again, the fake phone call, which is somebody Austin's just wrote there, I will make a phone call and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm in the taxi now. I'm just going past the stadium, and what? I'm going the wrong way? Oh, driver, my friend here said only we're going the wrong way. You know, so you're alerting them to the fact that you know that you're not, you know, going the most direct way or something. It also alerts them that somebody's waiting for you, which I think is important. When we're meeting people, you know, so you're going to see your clients, meeting people, I always tell them as soon as I can, really, okay, I've only got an hour maybe, because my friend's coming to pick me up. So even if I haven't got a friend coming to pick me up, they think that, you know, somebody's going to be outside or just around the corner waiting for me. So you're not telling them, you know, that you're all alone, and make yourself more vulnerable. Managing a driver, having the confidence to ask them to change their behaviour. Yeah. Again, it's difficult, especially if you're in the kind of job where you hire a driver, you know, and you're having the same driver maybe all day or for, you know, continuous days. You build up a friendship with these people, and if they cross that line, that barrier, it becomes more difficult sometimes because you're relying on them. But it's all about choosing the right words, and having the confidence to sort of say it without necessarily insulting them. But obviously, if they continue with that behaviour, then they need to be told outright and sacked and go get some, go get another recommended driver from somebody. But I generally always try to get a driver recommended to me through other people that have been to that country or work colleagues. And then hopefully, we won't get into this situation in the first place. But yeah, it's difficult. I've had somebody put their hand on my knee before, and take it off. That's not accepted. And tell them why it's not acceptable. Because again, different cultures see things differently. Tell people, I'm not comfortable with you doing that. Do you mind giving me some space? Yeah.
Kath, Georgina's just made a point there, which I think might be worth going into. So Georgina asked for doors to be locked before, and they refused. Georgina, did they give a reason as to why they refused to lock the doors? I think that this highlights what Kath was saying there, which is having a preferred supplier to whom you've already made it very clear, this is our relationship, our business relationship is based on you meeting the following criteria, and this is what we will expect from every time. And the result is we'll continue to use you. I appreciate it. It always work like that, and going into country.
So in this instance, it was a one-off trip to Jordan, and so it's a hotel driver essentially. So it's not someone that we'd necessarily used before. I don't remember him giving a reason, just a very confused look, when I sort of explained it while it's, standstill traffic and things for safety, but he didn't acknowledge that.
I sometimes even say it's company policy. I'm sorry, It's company policy. If we don't do this and something happens, then the insurance won't cover you or won't cover me. In some countries, especially if you're going on long journeys and it's isolated roads, I like to check the vehicle over. Some drivers look at you as a stupid woman. What do you want to do that? So again, I just say, hey, it's company policy. I know it sounds bonkers, but do you mind if I just check this and check that? Because otherwise we're not going to get covered by insurance. So it's trying to word it in a way that doesn't offend sometimes.
Yeah. Okay.
We've talked about that a bit on Heat, haven't we, Kath? Where you said, you effectively you blame the boss. You pass that problem off. You say, listen, it's not me. I know this is awkward for you, but I have to do this because the boss says I have to. So please, can we lock the door? Can we, whatever it is, and just, it's another option. It may not work, but trying to pass off that problem to someone else is often sometimes makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah, and if they're driving too fast, which quite, they do an awful lot, then I'll just say, look, can you slow down? I feel really sick. I'm going to be vomiting in your car, and you don't want that. But drivers are difficult, and that's why, if whenever you can, it's get a recommended person. But not always possible. Driving yourself, well, that can be even more dangerous sometimes if you don't know the areas, you've had a long day and now you're tired, and everything else. But sometimes self-drive is an option. It depends, how well you know that country, and it's not always your driver either. It's the other drivers around you. That's a problem. Yeah. Again, I was in Nigeria a couple of years ago, and I had to travel from Abuja up to Kano. And again, I had to get advice from people. Well, actually, Spearfish, we have a security guy there because I'd never driven that road before. I had a driver, but the road's full of potholes, so I definitely didn't want to be going up there in the dark. And to return back down to Abuja, the driver want to leave at a later time of day because he had a close family friend that lived by and he wanted to go visit them. And I was just insistent. And I said, no, we've got to leave at this time because otherwise we're going to be in the dark. And then the chance of us having a crash, and it is a bit of an express highway down there, you know, if you crash or if your car breaks down or anything, then you're liable then to kidnapping, you know, on the side of the main road there. So, yeah, it's having your protocols and sticking by them, even if you do upset people, which I did at the end of that, you know, because obviously he wanted to go see his friend.
I'm just conscious, Kath, that we are 10 minutes from from finishing up, but there are going to be more questions. So if I just push us on to the next slide, please, Rosie. It's the question slide. It's a question slide. So Rosie, that was we were on the questions. There we go. So just in terms of, I mean, you've got a great opportunity, as I've said, you know, Kath is extremely experienced, whether it's been heat training, I should say, or VORG training, and just in terms of her experiences. So any questions for her on VORG, or any questions from me in terms of the protocols and procedures and implementation of those and the risk management element, then please feel free to ask away. I think because there's actually only 23 of us, so if it's quite a long question, then rather than tapping into your chat box, just pop yourself up on screen and fire away.
It's probably easy just for people to unmic. Yeah, so anybody have any questions at all, or want me to elaborate more on anything that we've spoken about, and please do.
I should also add, if someone wants me to ask a question because you don't feel comfortable asking it, then if you go into chat box, you'll see everyone. You can address it to me directly, and then I'll ask it to the group if you don't want that.
Just one thing as well about harassment. You know, harassment, especially on social media, has escalated massively, especially over the pandemic, because more people are working, you know, from home and online and things. So again, you know, show somebody at work, show your boss, you know, let people know, don't sort of suffer in silence. But also try again, you know, if you're on Facebook, social media, a lot of people have to be for work. Try and have two different accounts, you know, have a personal account and have a business account. Because again, a lot of time, and I know a few people on here working for NGO agencies and people, but you're meeting people, you're meeting clients, and you're giving out phone numbers and websites and things, and it's very easy for them to then start stalking you personally and seeing your third-party friends and family and things. So try and keep the two separate if you can. You can have a virtual phone on your own smartphone. So you give your virtual phone number out to your client on a business card, for instance. That will still phone your phone, but they won't be able to get access to anything on your phone. So there's lots of little sort of tricks to keep, you know, your personal life separate from your working life.
Dan, you're going. Sorry, I'll step back then.
Okay, just one from me. What sort of tips or techniques can you give in terms of blending in? So when you're in a new, unusual place, you're very obviously not from that place. You want to keep a low profile. You want to, you know, be as unobtrusive as possible. What sort of techniques and tips have you used over the years?
Yeah. Again, it's that prior preparation. So research the area that you're going to. And try and wear similar clothing or similar colours of clothing. You know, I don't want to be wearing a bright yellow jacket, for instance, if everybody else wears dark colours, because it's just going to make people take a second glance at me. It's going to highlight me. As for wearing local dress, I tend not to. I try not to I wear headscarves and things, but I don't go for the full outfit because I'm quite clearly a Westerner, and the way Westernized people walk. We walk with a lot of confidence. Our body language is different from a lot of local people. So sometimes if you try and wear a burqa, for instance, it's going to make you stand out more rather than blend in. Would I wear one in a car to get through certain areas? Possibly. But again, if you do that, then you've got to know the local culture. So if you come to checkpoints and things, do the local women speak? Do they look at the men if they're spoken to? Do you look in people's eyes? So it's little things that will give you away if you are trying to blend into that extent for whatever reason. But yeah, it can be insulting as well. So generally, I would say be respectful, but just try their dress sense. I don't wear short skirts if local people all wear trousers, for instance. Even if they wore short skirts, I probably wouldn't. But yeah, you just got to try and people watch and do some research before you go, and then try and dress appropriately and respectful. And I've also dressed up and down in the same day. So if I'm going through a poor area, then I might be dressed a little bit more, not shabby, but I won't have a show of wealth. But when I get to my meeting, I might have to look smart. So then, put a smarter jacket on, for instance, and then put your earrings on if you want to, if you're going to an evening dinner with some, high-end people, then, you want to put your jewelry on, but I wouldn't necessarily travel with my jewelry on me because it's a show of wealth and makes you become a target as well.
Great. Thanks, Kath.
Can I just throw a question out to the group? Are people seeing an increase of efforts to engage with VORG or that element of duty of care, or is it something that people are just beginning to start thinking about? Or possibly people don't want to necessarily out their organisations. So if I don't see a great deal of answer on here, I'll take that to be the case. I do think some of certainly the recent high profile cases in the UK, engage with this. Thanks, Geraldine. Yeah, I'd agree. Certainly the NGOs that we've come across and the individuals within those organisations that we've spoken to have understood this, I think, for a lot longer.
Yeah. So, sorry, Andrea, you said the policies are set up. Do you think those policies are working, or they need to be changed slightly? Because again, who writes those policies? Is it men? Is it women? Is it people that sit in an office and never go out onto the ground, into your working environment? So do you believe that they're working or not?
It's really hard to generalize because it's very organization dependent, but from the kind of exposure that I've had to it, like all the right things are said or written, but people don't really know what that means. So I'd argue that maybe they're not really working as intended, or they don't offer the protection and reassurance that they ought to. Like people still don't necessarily know how to raise concerns and whether these concerns will be taken seriously. And I think that's because of organizational culture usually, and less because of policies.
I think it's absolutely that, Andrea. I think it's those paper policies, and funnily enough, you'll see this on the next slide. They might be in place, but it's having them simple enough to understand and then utilize without it becoming extremely complex and awkward and difficult. It just becomes the norm that we will engage with these if something happens, or something is perceived to happen or may happen.
Well, unfortunately, it normally takes an instant or a near miss to raise it to a level where people want to do something about it. And the Oxfam situation certainly put it onto the map, and I think has quite rightly put it almost at the top of most people's agendas, if not the top. I think you're right. We're probably still at the sort of policy and plan writing stage, and the implementation is still a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, and it's what's the outreach of those policies as well? Is it different for international or local staff? because that quite often changes as well. So if there's different policies for local people, and then you're having to team up with them, who's right and who's wrong? When you're trying to follow certain security procedures and things.
Just look at what Geraldine has just said there. I think, and again, that's absolutely right. You can have the policies and procedures and a corporate level in the office environment. Yep, okay, all well and good. They clearly need to still be applied. But actually, when we step out of that control of that office environment where those protocols and procedures are set up, and suddenly we've moved into someone else's environment, someone else's area of strength, I suppose, then that is where, when we were looking back at the threats, that is when that risk increases, because suddenly we're having to put into place slightly more dynamic assessments of a situation in order to maintain that as you've said there, Geraldine, that risk assessment and personal protection. And that is, I think, it's the dynamic element, is what Kath and the VOR course focused on, which was, that dynamic risk assessment. Okay, this situation, I've understood, I've done as much as I can getting up to where I am, but the situation has now evolved extremely quickly. And I said it's just a small part, that personal safety. And when we talk about personal safety, we're really talking about self-defense. We're talking about that point at which the situation becomes physical and hands-on. And we haven't gone into it in too much detail, but certainly that is one of the elements that we didn't get involved in on the course. The reason I think I don't want to make too much of a big deal about it is this assumption that we can just train people to fight someone off. Actually, there's a whole load of stuff we need to have been doing well before we find ourselves in that situation in the first place, and that is really when it has gone incredibly wrong. But nonetheless, we shouldn't be frightened about considering that as an option. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I think we are on the nose. Rosie, can you just put me onto the, thanks very much. So just in terms of key considerations, as I said, this subject is absolutely enormous, but the importance can't be stressed enough. First of all, identifying the threats. When I talk about identifying the threats, that absolutely has to be collaborative, because as Kath alluded to, what I may identify in the story about the B6, the armored vehicle, and then actually someone being more concerned about the office, everyone has a different risk profile. We might ultimately face the same types of threats, but when we drill down into those threats, individuals will face slightly nuanced versions of that threat, and then their risk profile, so their probability and the impact of the risk part will be different. So risk profile will be different. So collaborative. Everyone needs to look into this and understand, so that also you can see it from other people's perspective, and that's absolutely key. I think actually just developing a wider understanding of it, critical in all organisations. Andrea, as you said, and Geraldine, you touched on, so developing those protocols and procedures, but actually using them, having them easily understood. I think often, we create massive great documents, and then it's just effectively just a doorstop. So it needs to be something that people know where to find it, know how to use it, and have the confidence in using it as well. And then those plans, not just for responding to the incident, but also mechanisms to support people afterwards. So we don't want to be rushing to these things late and saying, right, something's happened, who do we go to now for support and help? And then that whistleblower mechanism. So if people aren't confident in coming forward, what have we got whereby people can, with a degree of anonymity, alert people to the fact that there are concerns, and looking into that. So those would be my key, I suppose, the key considerations. Kath, anything to add on that, or anything to wind us down?
No, I don't think so. Well, I'd just like to say thank you for people coming onto the webinar today, and hopefully it might help just sort of plant some seeds that gives you the confidence to maybe go speak to somebody within your organisation to look at the policies and then say, well, actually, this is a little bit out of date, or can we put this in the policies? Or, like I say, try and encourage people to get everybody together and speak about these problems that we face. And because if people don't know, or they've got those blinkers on because they don't want to know, then nothing will get changed. And reach out to me through Spearfish anytime if anybody wants to know or Darren, want to know more, or if we can help your organisations, but I'll let Darren speak more about that. So thank you all and keep safe.
No, thanks very much, Kath. I think, as Kath already mentioned, if anyone has any other additional questions they want to address, either to myself, Kath, or anyone else within the organisation, then please feel free to reach out. What I would say is, if this has raised any questions for you and you want any support in terms of developing protocols, procedures, or just advising on your current procedures in place, and do reach out. We can provide that type of support. And there's also obviously the personal safety and the VORG element for the training courses as well. So thanks very much. It's a difficult subject, but it's an important subject. So I appreciate everyone's attendance and giving us what you gave. So thanks very much from me. Take care, everyone.